What's up, Come Up family? My name is Mark, and this is Language Come Up, a place where I come up, and you do too. Today I'm very happy because I do have a friend of mine here with me, Mr. Dimitri. Oh my God, I'm gonna butcher the last name because especially I see the writing in English and reading Russian names in English or Russian in general in English really messes me up. So why don't you do the honors?
Okay, so nice to see you, Mark, at first, and then it's like, yeah, my name may sound really strange to English speakers, but Dimitri Lebedev, if we pronounce it right in the right manner in in a Russian manner, so Lebedev.
I think this actually is an easier one than some of the other ones. It's like in English pronunciation, I would say, okay, Dmitry Lebedev, and that's not too bad, right?
Yeah, that's not too bad, but still not Russian way.
I said the English way.
Yeah, okay,
I'm not trying to pronounce it in my Russian way yet. But before we continue, I'll call you Dima because I've always called you Dima. So why don't you introduce yourself? I asked you on, of course, because you are a language learning lover and language lover as well. So please.
Yeah, for me, at first I could say that, it's nice to participate in such a conversation with a fellow language lover. For me, it's really nice to be here. And about myself, I can say that I'm like a guy from Russia who is now living in Germany. And I'm pursuing my master's degree here, and that's why I'm obliged. I'm obliged to speak several languages, and for me it's really cool that before I was obliged learning them and speaking them, I really liked it, and that's why for me it's kind of mix of necessity and of hobbies. And
absolutely.
yeah, and I don't want to brag, but
Here we go, guys.
So during all my 22, almost 23 years of my lifetime, I managed to learn to a certain different degrees 6 other foreign languages. So it's like Russian is my native language, and I can speak to the descending order: English, English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, and Polish.
Excellent. And how did you first get interested in languages in the first place? Because you actually, the reason we know each other is because you took classes with me on italki, and normally my students, of course, they all really like English for the most part. Some people do it for work, but generally they like English. But I really had something in common with you because you liked languages, not just only English. And that was always interesting. So how did your language journey start, Dima?
I think I'm not the unique here, and for the majority of people who try to learn foreign languages in Russia, English was the first language because it's like an international language, lingua franca, and that's why it's like the pupils at school and the students at the universities are made studying English in order to prepare them for better career perspectives. And that's why my parents, when I was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, I was made learning English, but I didn't complain at that time. It's like I didn't understand why would I need to learn a foreign language, but I didn't complain because it wasn't so difficult for me. It's like I don't think I had a talent, but it's like sometimes people just are motivated to learn, even if they don't know why, they don't know the reasons, but if when it comes easily. So it's like that was the English. So English I was made to study. So and but then when I was 16 years old, I started learning Spanish. And to be honest, the reasons to start studying Spanish were quite dull, because because I'm a football/soccer fan, and that's why I'm a supporter of Real Madrid. And that's why I wanted to be closer to the team, and by that time I didn't think about any like career perspectives or about like some future usages. I just wanted to go deeper into this into the field of football or soccer. And but when I started to study at the bachelor's 2 years after, I just thought that I guessed that I had guessed correctly, because at my university there were a lot of Latin Americans, and learning like for 2 years prior knowledge of Spanish came in handy really. And I just didn't think about these future possibilities. I just got lucky, I think. And for me, it was really also lucky that I just started learning Spanish before it was mainstream.
You got it right before it exploded, right, Dima?
Yeah. I think it was I think like the reason of the explosion of popularity of Spanish was like, maybe I'm not sure, but there is some correlation between the popularity of Spanish and the song Despacito. And it's like
in Russia, I imagine, right?
And in Russia it's like as well. I think to be honest, I just I made some observations, and before like that time period, English was like the most like dominant foreign language, and after English there was like some kind of competition between French and German. But right now Spanish is like number 2. So it's like people learn Spanish after starting learning English, and sometimes even without English. And so right now like French or German are not secondary, but like on the 3rd or the 4th position. So Spanish is just its popularity in Russia increased, and I started studying it before that wave.
You're a pioneer of Spanish learning in Russia, Dima.
Yeah.
Because we talked about that a couple of years ago. That was really funny because that was such a global sensation, that song, and naturally that would inspire many people to learn the language, and that always made me laugh that you got in right before the Despacito. So when that became popular, like, oh yeah, I already know Spanish and things like that.
Yeah, and so by the time I started studying at the university in Moscow at my bachelor studies, I had somewhat decent level of like academical Spanish. But when I started speaking to people, I understood that it had been completely different level, and so I think I had B1-ish level. But really talking to native speakers, Latin Americans, for me it was like a huge boom. And that's why I think my like the speed of learning Spanish after I got to know many Latin Americans, it just increased dramatically.
Wow. And around what year was that?
Could you repeat, please?
Yeah, around what year was that? When was this? When all this was happening for you?
It's okay. So it's like I think it was. Let me think. Let me calculate. So I started. I think it was 2017, something like this. And for me, it was also like really a necessity to not only like a pleasure, but only again the necessity to speak to Latin Americans, because at my university in Moscow there was an opportunity to to study with your own level of foreign language only if you had chosen before English. So I chose Spanish, and I had to study like from scratch, from zero. and I already had somewhat like B1 level, and for me it was really boring. And for me, talking to native speakers was really some kind of deep, fresh air.
Absolutely, because what happens is just, you know, you study a language and then you actually get to use it with real people, and obviously it becomes alive. Maybe it goes from being a school subject to something that's really just real and breathing.
Yeah, and for example, when we were talking to each other in the canteen, at first I had a perception that I was really an outsider, because there were, for example, me and 5 or 6 other like people, Latin Americans, and they were talking. When they were talking to me, when they were addressing me, I could understand perfectly. But when they were talking to each other, I couldn't comprehend what they were speaking about. But at first I had this kind of frustration. But after some time, I think maybe after half a year, I started getting more and more, and it really helped me. So, and even though during my studies I had to go to the lower levels, but by talking to native speakers and also by attending some other some other events which were organized not in the university but by some other organizations, some foreign language clubs, it just helped me a lot. And I think I tried to make it as if I were in a Spanish-speaking country, so as much as possible.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think you had this experience of being in Russia, but in certain circles you could kind of open up a door and kind of go into a whole new world, you know, like a Spanish-speaking world or a Latin American world. I had a similar experience when I was in university. I had a really good friend from Iran, and he introduced me to the whole like Iranian community in this city. And, you know, it would be so interesting just be like the only, you could say foreigner, but it was actually my country. But, you know, it's like being the only person that's not of that nationality or of that area. And it was really, really interesting. And what did you think you drew from that experience? Because, you know, you're born and raised in Russia, but now all of a sudden you're spending time with Latin Americans, which, you know, I'm very familiar with living in Mexico City now. What did you kind of draw from that experience? What did you learn? What did you discover? It would be really interesting to hear that.
Well, at first, I think for me it was really a great experience, because for me it was, I think, the first time when I really immersed into the foreign culture, because prior to those that contact with Latin Americans, I didn't have such an experience with talking to foreigners at all.
In general, okay.
Well, for example, until university, I was 2 times. I have been 2 times abroad, but once it was Ukraine, and in Ukraine, so it's just Russian.
Of course.
And the second time was in Spain, but at that time I didn't speak Spanish that well. And when I was in Spain, I had been learning Spanish only for 2 months, so it's just I wasn't able to.
El baño?
Yes, something like this, and I just remember that some like erroneous phrases that I was talking, and I just now in the modern slang I could say that I felt cringy.
Right.
Yeah, for example, I remember one phrase when I was in Madrid, and I said, it's like after 2 months of studying Spanish, I said, "Somos no hablamos español," and for me, it's kind of funny, but I really like this experience. Well, returning to the matter at hand, it's like what I drew. For me, experience was that not everyone is unique. Well, everyone is unique, so not everyone is just this, and not everyone are the same. Because for me, it was really the first experience to meet someone who is different. Because in terms of even linguistics wise, we could say that in Russia it's some kind of, we have a strange situation because, for example, in Spain, even within Spain, there are plenty of accents, and if we talk about Spanish-speaking world, it's like hundreds of them. But but in Russia, we could say that there are three main accents, and two of them are dying out. So and almost only like 5% of people speak differently from Moscow.
Wow.
And that's why for me it was really some kind of a new experience to meet anyone different, because in Russia you could hear accents only if you talk to someone who is not Russian native speaker, because there are some, for example, some peoples who study their language first and only then Russian. But if you are Russian native speaker, then I couldn't tell any difference.
Interesting. Yeah, that's always fascinating about Russian.
So it's like Russia is a huge country, but everyone speaks the same as to my ears. And yeah, there were at first I was just fascinated, and I didn't notice any kinds of negative aspects. So at first, for me, maybe it's just me, but for example, I hate being late. But for Latin Americans and to the less degree to Spaniards, if they are like from 10 minutes to 30 minutes late, they are not late. They are on time.
But even from the Russian perspective, is it like this? Because I imagined maybe you're not exactly like, I don't know, the typical Russian. Maybe are Russians always like, how is their punctuality is basically what I'm trying to say.
Well, punctuality, I think in Russia there is a stereotype that a woman could arrive late, but a man should always be on time. And there are even like stereotypes of other peoples that are even more punctual than us. For example, we have a stereotype that Germans are very.
This is what I imagine too.
Yeah, the Germans are very, how it's called, punctual. But and I could say that Russians are somewhere like between Germans and Latin Americans. But for me, it's kind of funny to hear that Germans say that they are not punctual, and the Swiss people are very punctual.
It's always so interesting to hear like the inner like politics between people. You know, it's so interesting because we have an impression of, for example, I have the same impression of Germans, but what do the Germans think? And that's pretty interesting.
And it's like it was one negative aspect, but for me, I drew something which really affected positively my life, and that openness of people. For example, I could say that before talking to Latin Americans and maybe even foreigners in general, but Latin Americans in particular and especially, I could say that I was a really shy, timid person, and it took me a long time to start a conversation, and if it wasn't necessary to talk to someone, I wouldn't do this. But I saw, and it's like I was seeing that Latin Americans were always like talking to each other, but it's like and they were always like ready to help, and after it's like I showed that I could speak Spanish, it was like this readiness to help or readiness to talk to me just skyrocketed.
That's so awesome. And to touch on the why Latin Americans are late, living in Mexico City, which is a city of about 20 million people, you start to understand because the city is so big. The city is a monster, and to get around the city, if you don't have a car, which that could be its own problem because the traffic jams, but you would have to take, let's say, sometimes a small bus to one destination, maybe another bus, or maybe to the subway, and not all these things are like so on time. So it's like things can happen. All these situations can happen from one person getting from point A to point B. So it's like when people arrive, let's say if you were to tell me from like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 minutes, for me, that's like chill. It's like whatever, no big deal. If they were to be like late 30 minutes, I'm like, oh, when you run, but around like 10, 15 minutes, that's like nothing because everyone understands the things that can happen to get from point A to point B,
It's like, yeah, it's like understandable because it's like Moscow is like maybe a smaller city, but it's like the biggest in Europe. So that's why we experience the same things. But for me, it's maybe it's some kind of personal and psychological. If I know that I need to go somewhere really far away from my place, I always arrive on time and even like maybe 20, 30 minutes before. But if I know that I should go somewhere which is like maybe like just cross the road and I'm already there, just 5 minutes on foot, I will always be late.
That's funny. And yeah, I remember in 2019, after one of our conversation classes, I just randomly said, hey, I think I had some free time after class. And I said, hey, do you want to speak Spanish? And you're like, yeah. And we spoke, and I was actually really surprised. And I'm like, wow, you're much better than I thought. And I was actually really, really surprised. I wanted to ask you, have you ever thought that you have a talent for languages, or do you just think that's a result of your interest and effort?
To be honest, I really doubt that such a thing exists as a talent for languages. I just think that you have an interest towards something. And if you are motivated and you have interest in linguistics in general or some related topics, for example, if you're interested in the history or culture of the some specific country, you just have a bigger motivation to learn the language. And motivation, I think, is what's the key to it's like the key to success. And some people just, I think, every person just have the same capabilities, but just not so many people just want to study languages. And not so many people understand why should they use why should they use them, why should they study them in general. But if you know why you do this, and it will happen quicker than when you are made, for example.
Sure, absolutely. And one thing I love that you said is that you said basically through learning Spanish, you actually developed yourself as a person better. Maybe you were a little shyer before, but after interacting with Latin Americans, learning Spanish, you actually grew to be a little more outgoing, or at least be able to work with your shyness in a way that it's not holding you back. And I love how languages can really just improve our lives. When I moved from USA to Mexico, this whole new world opened up before me, and just to be able to take part in that was absolutely incredible, and basically the most life-changing thing in my life.
Yeah.
Now you live in Germany, and I always see that you're traveling around like, wow, Dima's traveling so many different places, Paris, wherever it may be. What has that been like? And for example, have you experienced, what kind of things have you noticed speaking the foreign languages that in the countries that they're spoken at? Because it must be an interesting experience to be off in Europe and especially be able to use these languages. But I'm really curious about some of the interactions that you've gotten from people of various countries. Because if I, being from the US, go to Russia and I'm speaking Russian, maybe they'll be like, oh wow, how cool. But what has been your experience knowing these languages, living in these different, or going to these different places in Europe?
Yeah, it's really a good question, because there is a difference between several countries. For example, I live in Germany, and for me, it's like I could go. It takes me a little more than an hour to get to France or to Luxembourg, so just French-speaking territories. And during my Christmas break at the university, I also traveled to Spain, and so I noticed some differences between Germany, France, Spain, and also I went to Belgium. But I was like in Brussels. It's like 80% French-speaking city. So it's like I could say that I've been to German-speaking area, French-speaking area, and Spanish-speaking area.
Oh, this is gonna be interesting.
And there is like a difference. And I could say that German-speaking area is one thing, and French and Spanish is another thing. So it's like Romance and Germanic. And for me, it was like a different experience, because when you go to France and when you try talk to the locals in English, they would help you, but with not so much enthusiasm.
Okay, that's actually better than what I've heard from most people. They're like being ignored and by.
Yeah, for example, when I was in Strasbourg and Metz, it's like cities which are really close to Germany. For example, Strasbourg, you cross the bridge. You just need to cross the bridge, cross the River Rhine, and you are in Germany. So it's like you could go by local city bus to Germany, and the Metz is just 1 hour and you are in Germany. So there, if you talk to people in English, they would just, oh, not this again. And but if you talk to them in German, they are much more prone to talk to you, to talk back and just answer whatever you want. So just I don't know why, but for them, I have a perception that everything else apart from English is so they could talk to you in every language but not English. And but in Paris it was a bit different, because it's a capital, and there are much more touristic spots, and that's why they tend to speak more English. But for me, it wasn't my goal. I just wanted to speak French as much as possible. But it's like not so many tourists speak French, and that's why like Paris is like I think one of the few cities where you could talk to locals in English. But in like countryside and in like smaller cities without French, it's much more difficult. And I think the same goes to Spain. So if you speak Spanish, you could go anywhere. You could explore the country without any problems. But if you don't speak Spanish, so it's like without like, or like if you speak only English, or don't speak Spanish in general, you could just go to some very touristic cities like Madrid and Barcelona. So I could say that Barcelona is very international city, because there are like many people who don't speak Spanish, because there are many people who just live there and work remotely, something like this, and there are many expats from different countries, and that's why Barcelona is just a city where you could talk to locals in English almost without any problems. Madrid, to less extent, yes. So, but in other cities, it's just much more difficult would be for you if you don't speak Spanish. But yeah, so it's like, but in Belgium, it's in terms of learning, it's like in terms of talking to locals in English is much better, because in Belgium English is used as lingua franca even between Belgians.
Oh yeah, because of the Dutch and French.
Yeah, Dutch and French Belgium. So if, for example, like French Belgium is called, like French-speaking Belgium is called Wallonia, and the Dutch-speaking part is called like Flanders. And for example, if one Flemish person comes to like Wallonia, he or she would be obliged, if he or she doesn't speak French, they would have to speak English. It's like, for me, it's really strange because you could talk to your compatriots in foreign language.
And
And
I found that to be so interesting as well. You know, a couple months ago, I went to some events, it was a birthday party of a Swiss guy, right? And he was talking to another guy. I thought that, I don't know, maybe he's like, I thought he turned out to be Swiss. I thought he was from a different country. And I noticed that my buddy was speaking to him in Spanish and he was responding in Spanish, and all these Swiss people, and they were speaking Spanish. And I was just like so confused. I was like, wait a second, what's happening? Like, and what you said was so true. Like, it's so hard for me to fathom that being from the same country as someone, you wouldn't, be able to speak that language. For me, that was just like, but so interesting just to witness, that they were using Spanish as a lingua franca.
Yeah, so it's like in Belgium, it's like they are more like prone to speak English because they need to learn it in order to speak to the other half of the country, and so not only to foreigners. And with Luxembourg, it's pretty much the same because there are 3 official languages and there are many foreigners, and that's why they also, apart from those 3 accepted like official languages, they also speak English like as the 4th language sometimes. So it's like French like speaking parts and Spanish speaking parts. For me, it's like one category, and Germany, I have never been to other German speaking countries, Austria, Switzerland, so maybe it's I think it's not so different, just I suspect. But in Germany, if you talk to if they know that you're a foreigner, and if you try to speak German, they would just instantly switch to English. It's just other way around, because it's like they would try to make you comfortable. So
right.
Just I always say not English, please German, because I'm in Germany. I want to immerse and I want to like to speak the language of the country I'm residing in as much as possible. And they say, "Are you sure?"
Yeah. That's so interesting. I love the different perspective. Like with the Romance languages, they'll kind of like welcome you and okay, great. But some of the other kind of Germanic, let's say, maybe like they would kind of like, they'll go, okay, maybe it'll help him out if I speak English to him. It's like you hear the stories about people trying to learn Dutch in the Netherlands, and it's like almost impossible. I was speaking to a guy who's from Belgium, so his native language is Flemish, and when he was speaking to someone in the Netherlands, they switched to English on him. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, so in Germany, it's practically the same. So if they know that you're a foreigner and they know that, for example, you speak English better, like just people like most of the times they just tend to make you comfortable and not them, because it's like if you are a foreigner, that maybe German is like a hard language, and that's why we should speak to each other in English. But it like which language is used, it really depends on the willpower of the one who is learning. So if you agree instantly, then you talk to English. But if you insist, it's like you speak German. But it's like what I'm talking about. It's like not everywhere. It's just, for example, if you go to like official buildings or like the city administration or something like this, to banks, they would talk to you as a default by default in German.
Okay.
Because it's like a state offices, state administration, and so it's like, because in Germany, in most of the regions, they have only one official language, German, and they would switch to English only if they see that you don't get anything at all. But when you talk to people on the streets, like just without any official ambience, it would be like how I described before.
Got you. And I remember we were talking, I think on Instagram a couple months ago, you had said that you regret studying Portuguese. And I was really surprised by that comment. I thought, were you saying that, I don't know, to be dramatic? Because I would think that, you study a language, you spend some time with it, you enjoy it, you wouldn't regret it, Do you actually regret studying Portuguese?
Well, sometimes I have a feeling that I regret it, because living in Russia just doesn't provide any opportunities of its usage. So because Brazil is like half a world away, even Portugal is like a different corner of Europe, and there aren't so many Portuguese people in general, and in Russia in particular. So just during all my years of learning Portuguese, I met only once someone from Portugal in Russia. So it just was one time per like 4 years. And for me, just I started to think, was it worth it? And when I moved to after I moved to Germany, I spoke Portuguese 2 times, and it's like 2 times in 5 months. So it's like it's better, but not so much as well. And
do you have any plans to travel to Portugal? Maybe you could kind of up your level a little bit.
Yeah. So for example, I obtained like B2 certificate in Portuguese, and I'm planning on going to Portugal, but going to Brazil for example, to the biggest Portuguese speaking country, for me right now it's only a dream, because it's like I can't it's really expensive at first, and it's also I would have to I don't have a sufficient amount of time, to be honest, because I need to plan like months before to go there, and I should just I think to undertake this journey, I need a lot of time and a lot of resources, and which I don't possess right now. And Portugal, I think it's much more probable, but nonetheless, Portuguese language in Europe is not so required. And I just, for example, I really like Portugal as a country, and Brazil, both Brazil and Portugal. So it's like the 2 pillars of Portuguese-speaking world. But the thing is that for me, which just counterbalances it, that neither in Russia nor in Germany, I don't see any opportunities to use it in a daily basis. And but to be honest, this is one of the.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe.
Yeah, it's like, I'm sorry. It's like I wanted also to add that, for example, this may be one of the reasons why I could regret, but in like Portuguese language also helped me to broaden like my perspective into Spanish language as well, and sometimes even in English, because because in English there are a lot of like Romance vocabulary, and sometimes these examples of Romance vocabulary appear in Romance languages, and sometimes it appears in every foreign language, in every Romance language, but sometimes only like in one specific example. And there are some words which are Romance by origin, but they are used only, for example, in Portuguese, and they are in English as well. For example, there is a verb to procure, and procure, there is a verb procurar, which in Spanish I don't use it at almost anywhere, but in Portuguese it's like a common verb. They use it all the time. And so it just helped me to like the learning of Portuguese helped me to learn better other languages.
Yeah, I've had that experience too. You know, I've done like some translations from English to Spanish from some words that I knew that it existed, but people would be like, "Oh, that word! I didn't really know that word." Oh, that, you know, it sounded like a higher register word sometimes in some cases.
Yeah, for example, this this example, like procurar in Portuguese is just a word which they use on a daily basis, but in Spanish, in Spanish, this word is just higher register.
It's a higher register. It's used, but you're not going to use it so much, just like in your everyday life. Not with friends. Maybe your boss will say, you know, make sure you do this, and he'll use the word, you know, procurar as like to make sure you do it. In these kind of slightly more formal situations.
But to be honest, this is one of the reasons why I shouldn't regret, and another reason is just because any knowledge helps. It's like it's better to know something than to be ignorant.
This is true. This is true.
And that's why it's like maybe I will use it not like as frequently as I would have hoped, but at least I possess this knowledge, and it's always better to have knowledge than not to have it. So that's why it's one of the biggest reasons
100%.
for me not to regret.
Absolutely. And I know when you started studying Spanish, you kind of studied the Spanish from Spain, but then you started interacting so much, a lot with Latin Americans. I imagine you kind of switched your styles a little bit, or at least knew how to talk to them. And is this something you like, or have you done this with Portuguese as well? Like, can you switch between dialects of the different languages that you know?
Well, I can switch, but of course I can't use like all of the variety of like all this linguistic variety. But for example, in Portuguese, I could switch between like some kind of generalized Portuguese from Portugal and Portuguese from Brazil. So for example, when I know that I'm talking to people from like Portuguese speaking countries of Africa, of people from Portugal, I speak their dialect, and I'm speaking like Portuguese from Lisbon because it's considered like the standard. And when I talk to someone from Brazil, I just use the Rio de Janeiro, it's a accent, because it's just, I found it really like the best for me. It just there are a lot of accents.
It resonated with you.
Yeah, and it's like in Brazil there are like dozens of accents, and I just listened to all of them, and I just found some particular example which I like the most, and started using it as a like tool to communicate with the Brazilians. And if I were to speak Spanish, for me right now, default dialect for me is Spanish from Spain. I'm trying to sound as a person from Madrid.
Okay, excellent.
But and I switched to Spanish from other countries. For example, for me, I could speak some like Colombian-ish maybe. And
you probably wouldn't use, I don't know, maybe, vosotros you would use.
Yeah, I wouldn't use like this, for example, vosotros forms, and I wouldn't use like slang from Spain, only if I were talking to, for example, a group of people from that specific country. So if I were to talk to someone like in person, tête-à-tête, how they say in French. So just one, just to each other. Only I would have, if I were to have only like one a communication partner, I would speak in Spanish from Spain, because just for one person to switch all my linguistic preferences, for me, I would say that it's not so good and not so comfortable. But if I were to speak, for example, a group of Latin Americans, I would have adjusted my way of speaking.
That's actually I find that a nice approach, because I try to say that I think it'd be nice if more people learned the Spanish from Latin America. You could really pick any country, and that would be valid and nice. But for Europeans, it's clearly understandable why they would learn Spanish from Spain. But at the same time, 8 out of every 10 Spanish speakers don't live in Spain. So they live in basically North or South America. So I think it's actually quite nice that you're able to kind of be aware of some of the differences, and that's pretty cool. And just knowing some of the words from different places, or some of these things that can really make people feel connected, and I found that also pretty cool.
Yeah, for me, but to be honest, I didn't have much of a choice when in terms of like Spanish, because after telling you, that in Russian there are almost no accents, and I just thought that maybe in other languages it could be the same, and I just didn't think about any accents when I started learning Spanish, and I was just attending a Spanish language course, and my first Spanish professor, Spanish teacher, didn't ask which accent would I want to choose.
Okay.
And I was just studying, let's say, just Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And only after having started communicating with Latin Americans, I found out that really my Spanish had been Spanish from Spain.
Mm-hmm. One thing I wanted to... Oh, continue.
Yeah. Okay, you could say.
Yeah, okay. Now that I have the chance to talk to you, I don't get the chance to ask this to many Russians, because I just don't find that this happens often. But you, as a Russian native, have also studied Polish. What was your experience with that? Because Russian's the biggest language in the Slavic family, but you, as a Russian speaker, chose to study another Slavic language. What did you think about that? What was your experience like? And anything you could comment about that?
Well, for me, to be honest, it's like, in many ways, at first I could say that as a prelude, that I like history in general, and history of Europe in particular, and of course, like the history of Poland and Russia are very intertwined. There are positive aspects, negative aspects, but no one could deny that our historical paths have crossed a lot of times, and that's why that's how surged my interest in Poland as a country. And I also would love to go there, and I have some Polish friends, and that's why it's like I have and I also like its culture, and it's like Poland isn't like the most popular country in Russia, I could say it honestly, but me personally, I could say that I like the history, I like the culture, I like the traditions, because I don't think that they are not so different from us Russians. It's like, yeah, there are some differences, but both peoples being Slavic peoples is just what maybe unites us in some way, and also, and that's why I decided to learn it, and because because of all these reasons, and also just because after having tried to learn other languages, I just maybe found some kind of momentum, and that's why I wanted more and more and more, and I just thought that, well, I like Poland, then I should try to learn Polish. And in terms of the experience of dealing like with the Polish language, to be honest, it wasn't so difficult for, but I could say that for English speakers it would be like a nightmare. But Russians, being a Russian native speaker, it helps a lot because I don't need to learn their grammar. It's already
Wow,
like 90% the same.
that's awesome.
And so the vocabulary is similar, but not so much. But when you already know grammar, you don't need to think how you could construct sentences, and it just helps a lot. And for example, when you don't need to think about how to create these like notorious grammatical cases, it also just helps a lot, because for example, in Russian there are 6 cases, and in Polish there are 7. But this 7th one is not so difficult at all. So, and
What is the 7th one?
It's called locative.
Locative.
Or vocative. I just
Vocative.
Yeah, it just when you address someone, you need to use this case. In Russian, it's disappeared, and still is present only in some fixed expressions.
Interesting. For example?
For example, Боже.
Oh.
So it's just you call to God. So that's why you use this word. So some Bog is just nominative case, and Боже it's just you're like calling God, and that's why you use this word.
Interesting. I never thought of that being like a case or anything like that. I thought that was just like a fixed expression.
Yeah, so it's like this case doesn't exist in Russian, and there are like several words, like for example this Боже or княже. Княже, it's like князь. Князь means like prince, and so it's like княже is just when you address prince. And there are only like maybe 5 words which are like rudiments of this 7th case, but in Polish this case is like commonly used even now.
Okay, very interesting.
But in terms of other stuff, in terms of other linguistic like perceptions, I could say that being a Russian, it just helps when you want to learn Polish. And for example, talking about Polish, I could say that many people in Russia say that it's funny.
It sounds funny.
Yeah, it sounds funny. And I could say that, and to be honest, it sounds funny to Russian ears, because in Polish there are a lot of hissing sounds, like sh, sh. And it's when there are lots of them like in a row, it sounds some may classify that it's funny, but to be honest, for me it was also interesting, why is it funny? And I observed that for example, for Czech speakers every other Slavic language is funny. For Russians every other Slavic language is funny. For Polish people it's the same. It's just for them like their language is true Slavic one, and the other are just funny.
I love to get these like window view of how people think, and that's something that I didn't know. How you just said that every Slavic speaker thinks that the other language sounds a bit weird.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's like, because when you hear other Slavic languages, it just you get some kind of like you may get some like general sense, but you always like walk around and you can't like get to the middle of the point, and that's why sometimes it's also sounds weird, because because it's like in the head you see some kind of blurry picture, but you can't make it like really a good quality.
Look, this is what Timothy says. That's why I wanted to learn Polish. It sounded like funny Russian. Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's like for Polish people, Russian sometimes is like it's always like vice versa.
Funny Polish.
Yeah, funny Polish.
Oh. And what about Ukrainian from the Russian perspective? or maybe you've heard something about. Yeah, what do you think about Ukrainian from the Russian perspective? How does it sound to you?
For me, I could say that for me, Ukrainian is a really beautiful language because you could hear on YouTube or in whatever source some kind of folklore Ukrainian music, and it's like really beautiful. Even it's like I understand most of the things due to being a Russian native speaker, and after having experience with Polish language, I could get almost everything in Ukrainian, and I like how it sounds, but and it's also sometimes sounds weird, but I could say that every Slavic language sounds weird in some way, but this weirdness is not a negative, it's not a disadvantage.
Right. Maybe it's only weird because it's new to you, but
Yeah,
the more you
exactly.
listen to it, it becomes normal and you find what's nice about it.
Yeah, and in terms of Ukrainian, I like how it sounds, but it's like, and I know why. For me, it's, for example, it would be really easy to learn it, well, because it's like it's also like an East Slavic language, really close to Russian,
Wow.
and the grammar is like even closer to Russian
Wow.
than
Polish, right?
the Polish one. But it
Interesting.
also has a huge layer of Polish vocabulary. So that's why that's why I understand Ukrainian better after having spent time with Polish.
It's like you uncover the world language by language, you know, how you did with Portuguese, now with Polish. It just that's one of like the more underrated aspects of language learning, just because it's like a puzzle to the world.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so in terms of Ukrainian, but yeah, so it's like I like how it sounds. I like
it's more melodic. I mean,
yeah,
it's a melodic language. Is it more melodic than Russian? Because people say that Ukrainian is quite melodic,
yeah,
but
yeah, it's melodic. But for me, it's always difficult to compare anything to Russian because I am biased.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's an honest answer. That's an honest answer.
Because, for example, when people say that Russian language is like really rigid and rough, I never agree, because for me, Russian can be as melodic as Spanish. But so
Russian has that stereotype that it's almost like German, where people just think of German as such a harsh language. They also put Russian in that category, and that's something that I realized very, very soon, that it wasn't like that. But I was drawn to it phonetically because as this beautiful mixture of hard and soft sounds that are constantly intertwining, and I found that interesting from a phonetic standpoint.
yeah, exactly. And so I think it's also maybe due to a larger distance between, for example, Romance languages and Slavic language, and that's why sometimes with the like new sounds, for example, in Spanish you could never hear zh sound or sh sound, and that's why when you experience or encounter something new, it sounds weird to you, and maybe that's why it could seem harsh in some way.
The only other Russian person that I ever met that studied Polish, he actually studied, he has a lot of common languages with you, actually. He told me, I would be really interested to hear your perspective, because I found it a little hard to believe, but I need a little more evidence. So he told me that, for example, as a Russian speaker, he said that it was either Spanish or Portuguese, or maybe both of them, were easier to learn for a Russian speaker than Polish. Would you agree with that? Starting from, let's say, just zero? Because I mean, I don't know. I would find that hard to believe.
To be honest, I think not. For example, I needed to. It took me only 3 weeks of learning Portuguese to be able to speak it, but it's 3 weeks only because of like 3 or 4 years of prior learning of Spanish. And when but my experience with Spanish was that I needed 2 years to get rid of shyness and to be able to talk in Spanish. But with Polish, my very first lesson in Polish was already with native speaker who talked to me only in Polish.
Wow. Okay. I really wanted to get your perspective on that because I honestly found it hard to believe, you know. But who knows?
So it's like and for me it was really some kind of advantage that, for example, my first like Polish teacher, she also knew some Russian, but like her Russian wasn't like perfect, and I could and I was able to speak Polish from the very first lesson. So just I hear her and I respond. And if I don't know anything in Polish, I would ask, like, in Russian, it's like this, in Polish, and in Polish, how it would be. And then I just, she told me this word and I would continue my speech. So I could speak from the very first lesson.
Wow, how cool. That's really cool. And one thing I have to ask you that I think about quite often, and you said that you are interested in history. And actually, I know that from knowing you. You reminded me of that. But you're interested in history as well. You know, we've seen kind of a shift in kind of Ukrainian mentality in recent years. And it seems like there's been more of a kind of a, you know, they're putting more focus or importance on the Ukrainian language. Have you ever thought about the implications for the Russian language in Ukraine and what that might mean in the future? Have you ever considered this idea?
To be honest, it's like I think I think in future, if nothing, well, it's like it's a really difficult question, but I'll try to answer as honest as possible. Like from my perspective, I could say that Russian, without any, like, with current policies of what Russian government is doing, Russian will disappear everywhere, like in the territories which are out of Russia. So not but for example, we could already see that in some places Russian is has disappeared already.
Okay, really?
For example,
okay.
for example, in many countries of Central Asia, for example, in Kazakhstan, is just it is used because there is a huge Russian-speaking minority. Russia is near, and that's why they keep speaking Russian. But for example, in other countries, as like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, you just not so many people speak Russian, and this number is steadily decreasing. And also the biggest examples, well, for example, in these countries it's still used, but not as commonly as before. But the biggest examples are Baltic countries. You could, for example, there is like also Russian-speaking minority, and for now, this minority, like in the most of situations, are the only speakers of Russian. So if you meet like some native Estonian, native Latvian, and to less extent native Lithuanian, they could speak to you like in their language, and the second language that we will choose, it's English, not Russian.
Wow.
And
very interesting.
And it's like there are political reasons of this huge, like the quick disapparition of Russian. And the second reason is just linguistic, because Russian and Baltic languages are not related. Well,
Yeah,
related.
okay.
And in Ukraine and, well, in Belarus, I think Russian will never not be used, because it's like, sadly, but I think in other country, their native language is disappearing.
It's very sad. I agree.
But in Ukraine, I think with current policies of all governments, like both Ukrainian and Russian will disappear, but not in the nearest future, because at first there are lots of people who have relatives in Russia, and like Russians have relatives in Ukraine. So also like the peoples are intertwined even with these political situations, and the languages are really similar. So if you, for example, are Estonian and you need to learn Russian, it would be really difficult. But if you're Ukrainian and you need to learn Russian, it would be much easier. And
Right.
that's why I think it's one of the like reasons why in Ukraine this process would take longer.
Right, but I think to some extent it's in process of just slowly decreasing of the usage, basically, because as I understand, for example, in public places, even in predominant Russian-speaking places, they have to address you in Ukrainian. For example, if you go to some kind of restaurant or McDonald's, that they're going to speak to you in Ukrainian first, and maybe if you speak back in Russian, they'll switch. But I guess that they have to speak to you initially in Ukrainian. Have you heard of that?
Well, I have heard of that, but I just don't want to talk about it, not because of some kind of politics, but because I have never experienced it myself, and I don't like to speak about anything that I heard somewhere and which I didn't experience by myself. Because I was in Ukraine in 2012, and I was like in city of Donetsk, and it was like the east of Ukraine, which and by that time I don't remember hearing Ukrainian speech in 2012.
Wow.
And but for example, my father, he served in the Soviet Union, like Soviet military in Kiev, because he studied there in the like military academy, and he was telling me that even during Soviet Union it was changing. For example, when he started studying there, I think it was 1986 ish, and Kiev was predominantly a Russian-speaking city. But when he graduated, it was like 1990. Everything just switched around, and all the billboards were in Russian before, and there was like small big letters in Russian, small letters in Ukrainian. But in 1990, even during Soviet Union, it was other way around. Ukrainian,
wow, how interesting.
Ukrainian bigger and Russian like smaller.
Fascinating.
And so I think maybe it's true, but I can't say for certain, because for me it's almost impossible to go to Ukraine.
Right. But I was told, I took a couple classes with a Ukrainian girl, of course, in Russian. She mentioned that the younger kids, the youth, now prefer to speak Ukrainian amongst each other and not Russian. And I thought that was a very interesting kind of signal for what's to come, because what's considered kind of like cool among the younger people, that's what they tend to speak. And I think throughout time, then maybe that's just another indicator that Russian's going to be less spoken and less spoken. It's like in the USA where, they just prefer to speak English, even if there's kind of oftentimes family languages, sometimes that they'll just respond in English. Of course, they're not speaking other languages with their friends. They're always speaking English. They're not saying, "Oh, let's choose to speak Spanish," amongst each other. It's always English because that's kind of like obviously the dominant language of the country. And now that I heard this information, the things that I just said, I just think, oh, it's going to be interesting to kind of follow the progression of this what's about that. Oh, what's happening basically.
Yeah, and I think that it will always happen, because when you feel that this language is foreign to you, you would try to speak the language which you consider native. But before, it's like my impression is that for most Ukrainians, they classified both languages, Ukrainian and Russian, as native languages. But with current situation, is maybe for them,
Right.
more. It's like for them, it's like for political reasons as well, is better to classify only Ukrainian as their native language. But I don't want to talk about it. I mean, in terms of go deeper into politics, because it just being a Russian, it's and talking about Ukraine right now is just I could talk about Ukrainian language, but about the country, yeah, I like them a lot, but just not a topic I would like to touch.
Sure. And one thing I did want to ask you, and we had a question from JR, I wanted to say, since you've studied a bunch of languages, you know about the difficulties of Russian. I wanted to ask you, well, it was going to be, if you weren't a Russian native speaker, how do you think you would go about studying the language? And here we have JR wanting to know what advice you have for people trying to learn Russian.
To be honest, yeah, it really depends at first, like which language is your native. For example, let's by default just use English, that English is someone's native language. I could just say that learning like Slavic language in Russian in particular, at first you shouldn't put an emphasis on grammar, because it's much more, for me, just maybe I'm biased as well, but I think that Russian grammar is much more complex than, for example, English grammar. And that's why, for me, I think putting emphasis on it right from the beginning would be really a mistake, because you would just be confused and frustrated that you don't have such progress. And I could assure you that if you make mistakes with even grammatical cases in the beginning, then most probably like 95% of people would understand you, even if you make mistakes. And so I think it's always better to make mistakes than to keep silent.
Of course.
And if you just put an emphasis on the grammar, most of the time people would be just frustrated because it's really difficult, and sometimes they just give up on learning after these obstacles.
I heard about that.
Yeah, for example, I even have experience with like talking to people who approached me, like for example on the same very italki or anything else, and on Instagram, who were like, for example, Brazilians or just Latin Americans in general, who were trying to learn Russian, and they were trying to talk to me in Russian, but after some period of time they gave up because they thought that, well, it's impossible. But I think, well, at first everything is possible, and you just need to know why you study like this or that language, and it comes to Russian as well. So just in linguistics wise, just avoid grammar in the beginning. You could always return to it, so just learn vocab, learn whatever, and then you could just apply this to future grammatical rules, because there are a lot of them and it's easy to get confused.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And the second, it just comes not only to Russian, but to any other foreign languages. You just need to know why you do this.
This is true. This is absolutely true. And you know that I'm learning Russian, and I, for a period of time, actually quite long, actually a bit longer than I wanted, I didn't study grammar. But now that I am studying grammar, which I have been, it's actually, I'm finding it quite interesting, and you'll find me kind of being attracted to learning more about it. And it's like, because now I have a foundation, I have a base to draw all of these things from. My understanding is fairly respectable, and I can communicate to some extent. But now I have like reference points for these rules, and oftentimes that I'll see a rule or see why something is, and it makes sense because I've seen this in my reading, I've seen this in my listening, these kind of structures, these kind of endings, these nuances in words. And I actually find it quite nice, as opposed to, I don't know, being kind of just drowning in the grammar from the beginning. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because it's like, for me, Russian is a beautiful language, and not because of how it sounds, but also because it's really like flexible, and because you might be understood even without deep knowledge of it, and also because I could also suggest learning at first vocabulary and, well, some basic stuff, and go deeper in vocabulary, because well, in my perception, in my experience, I could say that Russians are not Germans in this like in this regard. If you go to Russia and try to speak Russian, then you will be welcomed to do so. It's just they will just explode out of happiness, and because like there is a belief that Russian is a very difficult language, and when foreigners try to speak it, everyone is just happy. Well, normal person is just happy to hear Russian from the used by foreigners. So just even if you know like a basic sentence, or if you know just one word, or just, oh, that's cool that you know this. If someone starts to talk in Russian, it's like, it's not like in Germany we would like suggest that you speak English. So it's like, for me, I think, yeah, learning Russian is just not so difficult as it might seem. May seem, and also there are some things which are even, yeah, what I said, flexible, because, for example, we don't have a strict word order, so you could just put the words almost in every position, and it's like not the English when you need always to check whether like the subject and object have like a specific place. And in Russian you could just do whatever you want, to be honest. And also I think the rules of pronunciation in Russian are easier than in English, for example. So just grammar of Russian is much more complex, but there are some aspects, I think, in every language there are something more difficult and something easier.
Sure.
And in Russian, yeah. So, and also for me, which really, well, saddens me, that many people just don't want to learn Russian or any like similar language because of Cyrillic alphabet. Because, for example, even my fellow students, they think that Russian is some kind of alien language because we have a different alphabet. But I could just say that learning Cyrillic alphabet takes, well, with like maybe week maximum. So just
that's one of the easier things of Russian, actually.
yeah, because it's like most of letters are the same or similar looking. There are not so many letters which are completely different. They exist, but not so many. And I think even the basic principle of how the words are created in Latin script and Cyrillic script is the same. Just every letter represents each sound. So it's like not Chinese or Korean or Japanese, when one word may be like sound, maybe a sentence, or maybe a word. We just, in Cyrillic, it just, the principle is the same as in Latin. And so many people just don't want to learn Russian because of alphabet. But yeah, the thing is that what you've said, that alphabet is not the worst thing.
Right. So if anyone has any more questions, please write them in the comments. We're going to start to wrap up pretty soon. And if you haven't liked this video, go ahead and do so. So let's look a little bit through the comments. And Czech is funny, Polish. Interesting. Me too, Dimitri. I can understand Ukrainian better thanks to Polish. Very interesting. This is, yeah. And it's just also the fact of, sometimes certain languages to us sound more pleasing to the ear than another. There's some languages like this for me. For example, maybe Dutch. I listen to Dutch and I don't think that's a particularly attractive sounding language, but that's just to my initial ear, right? But that's not to say that, I wouldn't learn the language or I wouldn't find the beauty in it, just given the exposure, meeting people, spending time in the country. You take whatever the most standard ugly language or whatever, there's not even such a thing, but let's say if there was, you can find the greatness in that as well.
Yeah, so I completely agree.
Mm-hmm. My Polish teacher was too young to have learned Russian in school. I drove her crazy mixing Russian into my Polish. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I could say that mixing Russian with Polish, or for example, mixing Spanish with Portuguese, it's better than just to keep silent. If you make mistakes, with every mistakes you'll get better. But if you just don't speak at all, you will never have a higher level.
This is true. I'll have to leave Russian and go someday. Right now, I only know very basic greeting things, etc. The only full sentence I know is Lenin was a mushroom, which isn't particularly useful to know. I don't know in what situation that would be.
Lenin was a mushroom, just a meme in Russia. So and to be honest, I don't know from where it came, but I know that it's a meme.
Oh, I had no idea what this was. Spanish always sounded rough to me before I started to learn it. Interesting. JR, thanks you for the wonderful advice. And just to expand a little bit, the fact of knowing your reason, I mean, that's just such a strong motivator, if not the strongest motivator, to continue, because whatever challenges I face in my Russian journey, and I'm sure there's going to be many of them, I know I want to learn this language, and I know that some kind of difficulties is not going to stop me.
Yeah, because I think when you really know why you learn, you would never stop, even if you encounter some really huge obstacles. But if you just sometimes learning something out of fun, it may be difficult because if you encounter the very first problem or the very first obstacle, you would stop because you just don't know why you are doing this. For example, that was my case with the German, because I was made learning German by the very parents when I was 11 or 12 years old, and they were saying that German is the same thing as English. It will be easy for you. And I didn't give up on English because it's I didn't know why I started learning English, but I just was successful in it. I just didn't see any reason to give up if it just comes. But with German, it was much more difficult. And as a really not even a teenager, it was really difficult. And I didn't know why would I learn German. And that's why I gave up and restarted only moving to Germany.
Poles explode even more than Russians. Have you had the chance to use much Polish with Polish people, Dima?
Yeah, for example, for me, it was kind of funny how I met all friends that I have from Poland. It's I have for now 2 people from Poland with whom I communicate frequently. And I just saw a video on a really popular video about Polish language on YouTube, and I left a comment in Polish saying that, "Hi people, I'm from Russia. I really love your language and I have recently started learning it." And I obtained, I think, several thousands of likes.
Oh my gosh!
On that comment, and there were
nice.
several hundred comments, and 2 people just wrote me, I'm Polish and I want to learn Russian. I want to practice Russian, and maybe we could talk to each other. And that's how I got to know 2 people from Poland.
Language is always opening doors. Very cool. Yeah, the Russian alphabet is quite nice, and it's this nice medium where, for an English speaker, a speaker, anyone that doesn't have that kind of script, it's quite interesting because as we talked about, it's not so very hard to learn. It's actually one of the easier things. But once you actually start using it and you're reading in Russian or a different script, it's like, well, it's in Russian in the Cyrillic in particular. It's really exciting because you're like, wow, I'm reading a different alphabet. I'm reading a different alphabet than my own, and that's really awesome. And it's not so hard, so you're able to kind of, get that enjoyment from it relatively quick. And that's one of the nice little perks of
Yeah,
learning Russian.
I think when you learn Russian from like perspective of the person who is really used to Latin script languages, this enthusiasm is even higher than the other way around. For example, because Russians are used to Latin script languages because most like 95% of popular languages are Latin based, and that's why you could see Latin script everywhere, and people from very childhood already know how to read Latin letters. So it's like much more common than, for example, for people from Western Europe to see Cyrillic something.
Okay. And this is one thing I wanted to touch on too. Any other languages you wish to study in the future? What does the future hold for Dima in his language learning journey?
Well, for me, it just I just want to bring all my existing languages to a higher level. For example, I have C1 in English and Spanish, and B2 in French and in French and Portuguese, and some kind of like B1 in Polish and German, and I want to all of them being at least B2.
Okay.
And after that, I just see that I understand Ukrainian a lot, and I could even speak it, but I'm not so sure because I don't know whether it will be needed. So just understand it without even learning it. And the same goes for Italian, because when Italians are talking really slowly, I can get them because of my previous like process of learning French, Portuguese, Spanish, and because I also sometimes understand Italian, and I just have this experience because, well, in Germany there are a lot of Italians who just, well, at least in my city there were a lot of exchange students from Italy, and that's why they were talking Italian, and they were really surprised when I could understand them.
It's that's so cool, and it's funny because I remember I always joke about this, that I was at the point where I studied Russian for 6 months, and when I heard some random Italian, I understood more Italian than I understood Russian after studying it 6 months, and I never even studied Italian.
Yeah, and so it's like out of simplicity of languages, I would say that these like are the most obvious choices: Ukrainian and Italian. But out of like some kind of passion languages, I thought about Greek and Latin.
And no interest to study languages outside of the European sphere?
To be honest, I think no, but not because some kind of lack of interest, but because with each passing year, for me it would be difficult to learn any other language because I wouldn't be able to dedicate so much time to it. Because like when you are a student, you just have more time, and when you are like when you are on full-time job, you need to spend time working and not learning languages. It's an ideal circumstance when languages are your job, but it doesn't always happen. And for example, with me, it's not the case. And you should put much more effort into Asian or African languages while being European. And that's why for me, like languages I mentioned are obvious choices. 2 out of simplicity because I already understand them to a certain degree, and Latin and Greek because I really like history, and Greek language is just I like Greece because they were in the beginning of Russian history. They were like a beacon of civilization, which like all the knowledge came to Greece, to Russia. For example, even my name, Dmitri, is Greek name.
Is it? Wow. The most Russian name ever is Greek. How about that?
Yeah, so it's like it's Greek by origin, and Latin is because it's if it would be like a challenging but not so difficult when you speak so many Romance languages, and it may be dead language, but it would be always cool to be able to speak Latin.
Oh, sure. Have you seen the guy's channel? There's a guy, I think he's an American guy, but he speaks Latin.
Yeah. Scorpio Martianus, I think it's called.
He had a really cool video when he's in Rome and he's doing this experiment, whether Italians understand Latin, and he's speaking to them in Italian. It's such an interesting video.
Yeah, I enjoyed those videos because it just, for me, as a person who loves history, even like, for example, I study engineering and IT, but I love history as a hobby. And for me, just hearing Latin, for me, it was just an experience, maybe to return to the Roman Empire for a duration of this video.
So cool. I know. I think that's the charm in studying something like that, because you can kind of just like kind of go back into time in your mind, and of course you understand just the root of the whole Romance family tree. That's also very nice as well. Dima, what would you have to say to the audience as last final advice about anything that we've talked about, anything about language learning, languages, travel, etc.?
Well, my advice is always not at first, like, be yourself. It's one of the biggest advices, but also just not to fear not to have fear of making mistakes, because sometimes people just don't have progress in languages because they have fear of making mistakes, and it's just what stops this progress, because you just need to understand that if you, for example, if you make a mistake, 99% of people would just understand you nonetheless, and they would say, well, it's not a problem. But even if you encounter this 1%, they will laugh at you, but it would be like the first and the last time when you meet this person, and you shouldn't care at all. And that's why I could say that just make mistakes, but well,
right.
not
and anyone who laughs at you.
Yeah, and
continue.
Yeah, well, like, make mistakes, but not on the language exams, and well, some kind of a joke, but at least you should just know that with each obstacle that you overcome, you become better, and without making mistakes, you could never have the progress. But and also, it is what I could say about language learning in general, and I could say that just the very, like, the same process of learning language, of learning the foreign languages, helps to discover a lot of things about other countries. So I think when you learn, when you know only one language, like your native language, you just are limited to you are very limited, and you are limited to the perception of your people. It's like one specific people. But if you know at least one other language, you could just think differently. And with each, like, when you know more and more languages, it will just help you to broaden your vision and see the world from a wider amount of perspectives.
Absolutely. And anyone who would make fun of anyone trying to learn a language or speak a language reveals himself to be a jerk in the first place. And the way I see it is, all right, well, you laughed at me for speaking a language. You're a jerk, and I don't want anything to do with you, because good people are not going to do that.
Yeah, and also it's like one of the things I would say to this kind of people is just I'm trying to speak your language, and it means that I already know something apart from mine. And if you laugh, you just 99.99% you just speak only your language. That's why I have an advantage. Even my worse, like a worse version of your language, it's already comes to my language, and that's why it's like 1.5 maybe, but you have only one.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dima. You guys give this video a like if you haven't already. And Dima, thank you so much for your time and your insight. It's been very interesting.
Yeah, it was really a pleasure to be able to talk to you, Mark.
We'll see you next, guys. We'll see you next time, guys, and stay on your come out.